Hi friends, it's Lisa Hetrick, illustrator for Gina K Designs, and I'm so grateful you could join me today. I have a super fun tutorial I'm going to be sharing with you today based on this card design that I did. And I'm really excited because it's a watercolor ghosting tutorial that I'm going to create today. And I'm also doing a little bit of patterned paper stamping and a little bit of overstamping, but using a single color palette. So here are the dye base inks that I'm going to be using from the Gina K line. I'm going to be using their new color, Coral Reef. I really like this red-orange color. Tangerine Twist, it's a fantastic orange. And my favorite pink in the line, Passionate Pink. I'm also going to be using the sea glass on the sea glass, the coordinating piece of cardstock. So I'm going to create some patterned paper on this cardstock that I have cut to 4 1/4 by 8 1/2 and scored at the 5 1/2. And I have 2 other pieces of cardstock here. I'm using some of the black Gina K cardstock and also a piece of watercolor paper that's cut to just a little shy of 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. And I just really wanted a little bit of that black to show through, just to kind of give the whole project a little bit of dimension. So I'm using my Hello Beautiful stamp set in this project, and I'm really focusing a lot on those large blooms. I'm also going to be using this stamp set from Gina K that is Butterfly Kisses. I'm going to be using the Sentiment. I'm pretty sure I'm going to be using the Friends or Flowers in the Garden of Life. And I'm going to be using also that open line leaf element. I think that these 2 stamp sets coordinate very well, and I think they're going to look really well together in this watercolor ghosting technique. So I'm starting out by just using the large bloom from the Hello Beautiful stamp set and inking it up in the sea glass and doing a little bit of tone-on-tone stamping with that coordinating piece of cardstock. And you can see that I'm only stamping around the edges because just the edge is going to show through. So really not much of it's going to show through here. So now I'm moving on to the piece of watercolor paper and taking 2 of the Distress Oxide inks. I'm using Spiced Marmalade and Picked Raspberry. These are 2 of my favorite colors in the Oxide palette. And you've seen me do Oxide watercoloring before in some of my other videos, and I'll tag them up here. But I'm doing it again, and I'm just using a little bit of Perfect Pearl Mist in this mister water bottle, and I'm mixing these 2 colors together and really working on a wet-on-wet piece of cardstock. So I did wet the piece of cardstock first, and I also wet the Distress Oxides on my craft mat so that I could dip that piece of watercolor paper in to create that look and feel, to create that background. I really love creating backgrounds like this. So I went ahead and misted the piece of watercolor paper again before I start this overstamping, and I inked up the big bloom in Coral Reef, and I'm going to go ahead and stamp it down on the Distress Oxide while the paper is still wet. So the ink is wet, the dye ink is wet, the paper is wet, and it's all being stamped down into this Distress Oxide. You can see that it's starting to bleed into the oxide. So the Distress ink and the dye ink are coming together, and they're kind of bleeding together. And as I'm drying it, you can start to see that the bloom is fading to the back. So there's a reaction here happening with the water and the inks, and the image is fading to the background and starting to get this ghost-like feel to it. And I am digging it because it looks like it's embedded in the paper. So I'm moving on and using the leaf and inking that up as well with the Coral Reef and just adding a few touches of that around the piece. And I'm building some other images around this ghosted element here. So creating some layers on top of layers, and so that ghosting kind of fades to the back, and then we have some of the other line art images that come to the front. So I'm still using the Coral Reef, and the paper is still very, very wet. So as I'm stamping the dye ink into the wet paper, there's a lot of bleeding happening and a lot of texture happening. And it's really giving me this really, really neat watercolor effect. So now I'm moving on to doing a little bit more overstamping with the larger bloom and using the Passionate Pink so that I can bring that color forward and some of the ghosting backwards. And really, you're starting to begin to see all the layers and dimensions now in the design. And so that ghosting is becoming more prominent and the line art images are becoming more vibrant to the front. So taking the silhouette stamp and inking it up in the Tangerine twist and kind of adding it in a few spots here as filler. And I'm also picking up the stamp, the leaf image stamp, and just trying to create a little bit more texture coming in. And I have inked it up with the Passionate Pink, and I really love that color. You can see the oranges and the pinks, the solid stamps and the line arts stamps just start to blend together, but what you're seeing is a lot of dimension. So we have things that are moving forward and images that are moving backward. And the way that dye ink has reacted with the oxides, that ghosting effect is happening. So I'm pulling the leaf image from the Butterfly Kisses stamp set from Gina that Gina designed. I love this stamp set. If you haven't checked this out, you really need to. It coordinates with her line of ThermoWeb foils and transfer sheets, and it is beautiful, but I really, really like it because I think in this design, it is a nice contrast between the line art images in the blooms. So we have some more thin line art images and more thick line art images. And I've got a little bit of that bleeding going on up here in the corner with the smaller bloom, and I really think it kind of helps add a nice little dimension here with the ghosting. So we have some line art, we have some ghosting, and it's just, I don't think I could have created a better piece of pattern paper. So I went ahead and just dried it up really, really good so that I could get all of the pieces of the card assembled and all the different layers. And you can see just that little bit of extra sea glass around the edges. It kind of frames in those pinks and oranges, excuse me, in the main piece of pattern paper, the main card front. So now I'm going to go ahead and add the sentiment from the Butterfly Kisses stamp set. I really love the sentiment, friends are the flowers in the garden of life. And since this piece of pattern paper really kind of does look like a garden, I think it's perfect. So I kind of have this really nice piece here in the center, this nice open space, and that sentiment fits in there perfectly. But I really felt like there was a little something missing up around that F. So I went ahead and used the Amalgam ink and stamped down that smaller bloom, and then took the coordinating silhouette stamp that goes with that small bloom from the Hello Beautiful set and inked it up in some of the Passionate Pink, took a little bit of a dry brush and kind of dabbed that dry brush into that silhouette, and just to kind of take some of the ink away and create a little bit of a texture, just a little bit of a focal point for that particular stamp. So when I stamped it down, you can see some of that texture coming through. And I just kind of misted it a little bit with a little bit of pearl mist and fussy cut it out. And I think it makes the perfect finishing piece on near that F, and adding a few little gems just kind of gives it a little bit more symmetry there. So here are the two cards together. The Hello Friend was the original design, and then the Friends Are Flowers in the Garden of Life was the ghosting version of the design. And I'm super excited about the look of this technique. I really think it created a beautiful piece of pattern paper, and it was super simple to create. And here's what the final card looks like. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.